So, hey everyone, happy Friday again, in case you watched the earlier podcast. Thanks, Paul, for joining us with his photoshopped background as per usual.
Yeah, I do
So,
good
Joe,
Photoshop. You might see some people walking by eventually during the day
yeah,
here. We'll find out. We'll see.
we got
My
those
Photoshop
nice
skills are good.
high-masted ships, though, which is it's always good.
Yeah, for
Y-
those hurricanes that hit us in California, we got to lower those masts for the 2 inches of rain when the hurricane hits.
Yeah, so for those, you know, I hope you guys paid attention. We're going to officially roll the intro in just a little bit and get to the actual news stuff. But I did a a video, like a short TikTok level video that of course I put on TikTok and all the rest, about the main subject for today, and I did a Twitter thread. So there's all that for extra looking in, but if you just want to hear chatty chats on it, this is what it's for. A couple other things I should note. One, this is the first time in a very long time I'm also streaming on Twitter/X. So this is going live currently on Odyssey, on YouTube, and on Twitter under my personal name or whatever, not the channel thing. So yeah, it's out there everywhere, wherever you like to do it. People just don't like to click a link to go to a different thing. They like to be scrolling through and being like, oh, I'm
Like
gonna check this
scrolling,
out.
like, oh, it's talking to me. I'm hearing the audio. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
lazy.
Yes, and so I can't tell. I get like Odyssey is just for the I guess the semi decentralization of it, right? YouTube does pay some ad revenue. X will if I become famous. So either make me famous, or those would be my two personal preferences. But of course, sometimes, especially with the privacy crowd, like the Zcash crowd, they always jump over to the Odyssey stream. And so, yeah. And the final thing I'll note before we start seeing how many people are in the chat and seeing if we want to roll the official intro is I am a shout out to Crypto Canal because I'm wearing their ETH shirt, the ETH hoodie, and the 1 Inch Network socks that they gave out at ETH. So I just happen to
Nice.
be all swagged out in ETH stuff, not
Thanks
intentionally.
to Eleanor Blanc. Great
Yeah.
job you're doing over there.
Yep.
Hope to
Absolutely.
finally visit ETH Dam, hopefully next year.
Yeah, they better have me back as a speaker, because if not, I'm going to be very annoyed. Because if they did it once, that'll mean that it's like, what, you're big leaguing me now? Like, you had a great conference, now like we don't need to invite this loser anymore. But I guess that's up to me to, like, you guys better be
Prove it.
subscribing and following on all my platforms, so I'm big enough to be undeniable at that point. So please. Anyway, let's see. Repulse. Three. I got a few extra viewers that I wouldn't normally have, I guess, on X, as it were. All right, I think it's probably a good time to roll the official intro and get going. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. So, hey everyone, officially now, happy Friday. It's the Digital Cash Rundown episode 126, which that's quite a lot of weeks I've been doing this. Always fun, always kind of good reset on a Friday. I'm joined by the one and only Pollinator, or Paul Puey, Master of the Arts of Edge. How's it going, man?
All right. I think we're all one and onlys. We are fully non-fungible humans. And so I think everyone is special in their own right, some more than others. But thanks for having me again. Really important topic we're going to talk about today.
Yes,
And one close to, I think, both of our hearts, with respect
absolutely.
to privacy. So excited to get into it and see how we can move this industry forward.
Yeah, for sure. I should note on the one and only thing, I have not met another Paul Puey. I have not met another person with my name either. Some close variants, but nothing quite there.
There is
But
actually another Paul Point in this world, believe it or not.
yeah, I'm sure there's somewhere out there.
He's probably
But
dead. He was like 75 when like 15 years ago.
you
So
gotta look at me. I'm the Paul Puey now.
yeah, I'm the
Um,
one. Now I'm the one and only. There can only be one. Yes.
but
Guess you took
I
him out.
when I did the Zcash conference recap, I believe last week, I can't remember exactly when, but I had Ryan Taylor on, and he's been in crypto forever. But he's definitely not the only Ryan Taylor I've had on the show. because the guy
Dash.
used to head up the Dash core team.
Right.
Yeah, also was named Brian Taylor. Probably still is, in fact. So in that case, there's more than a couple.
There's more than one.
All right. So banter aside, it's time to get to the sad stuff or whatever. So, just throwing up the CoinDesk headline or whatever. Breaking: Tornado Cash developers Roman Storm, Roman Semenov were arrested and charged with money laundering and sanctions violations. So, hot take on this before we delve into like the deeper elements of it.
So, I mean, hot take, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, because we are a bit of in a bubble, will say, "Oh my God, they just took down the developers for writing code, and that's free speech." And I think looking carefully, assuming a lot of what was written in the indictment is true, right? And the indictment did seem like it had stated obviously some opinion, but it stated a lot of facts, such as what kind of servers they ran, what they said, communication on private chat channels. There definitely seemed to be an implication of not just writing code and deploying it to an open blockchain. And I think that infrastructure side is one that kind of dinged them pretty hard. However, the key high level piece that I think really made this a big case for the government is that with respect to Tornado Cash and a lot of opt-in, jump through hoops privacy tools, is that it makes privacy not normal. Right? That shirt that a lot of people were wearing at the Zcash conference, both you and I just came from and spoke at ZCon 4 in Barcelona, which is a Zcash conference where almost everybody cares about privacy. And one of the big mottos is privacy is normal, meaning that it should be normal to have and to care about privacy. And Tornado Cash is what I call the example of jump through hoops to get privacy. Which means that average person isn't going to use it. And there's going to be two categories of people probably used Tornado Cash: privacy enthusiasts and illicit actors, right? People that are money laundering, drug dealing, and whatnot. Those are probably the only two categories of people. Nobody accidentally used Tornado Cash. No one used it without realizing they were using it. And I think that's the inherent problem here, because if you look at all of the indictments that they put against Roman Storm, the Romans, is that the Romans are at war. The indictments you could put onto Signal, right? Except you can't money launder on Signal, but the facilitating of money laundering, helping terrorist activity, all of that you can put onto an app like Signal. And Signal for sure is running infrastructure. They are running servers, they're keeping those servers up and running. And I am fairly certain there's illicit communication going on through a private app like Signal. Right? It's probably a go-to for a lot of illicit actors, but it's also the go-to for so many people that are just trying to communicate. And I communicate with a lot of people about vacation stuff on Signal. But literally this past weekend, it's coordinating to go find each other to go paddleboarding out in the harbor. We were communicating on Signal. And so that is the inherent, the part that is really missing in products like Tornado Cash, is it's not something built for privacy is normal. It's something built for privacy maximalists and illicit actors, and hence that will become a big target. I don't know how to avoid that for these type of tools, in all honesty.
Yeah, and that's it. That is one interesting thing about like the use case, because of the limited use cases. I guess the way you have to go out of your way, the only categories of people who'd use it would be limited. Now, I do think there's a couple of extra categories of just the Tornado Cash, like who'd go out of their way for that, which obviously privacy enthusiasts, obviously people with something really to hide, like something malicious to hide. Also people with something to not malicious to hide from the malicious. And in the case of like Ethereum, where, let's be honest, like Ethereum privacy is so bad, but no one cares. Like almost no one knows how to use.
Not no one, but definitely a lot don't.
Yeah,
a lot of the money in Ethereum doesn't care.
Compared to how much money there is in Ethereum and how bad the privacy is, compared to considering those two factors, I would say statistically no one cares because of just how like expensive NFT, like people spent lots of money on NFTs, and then just everyone can see all their collection and potentially rob them or whatever. I mean, it's madness. Just that this space hasn't matured to where every petty criminal out there knows exactly how to use a block explorer and use some basic tools to tie people's identity to their addresses. So, but right now, the third category maybe of people would be people with like large financial institutions, or maybe like political entities using this, or whoever who says like, look, we don't personally care about privacy and we're not criminals, but we do need to take extra steps beyond what Ethereum adds with pseudonymity to just make sure people aren't tracing these easily, at least tracing these giant movements of cash or whatever other things. So, but I admit it's mostly, you're right, the first two categories are like almost everyone who'd use Tornado Cash, and the actual like mainstream usage, normal usage is not very high, I would say, or was not very high.
Yeah, it's not really high. And I think taking, Signal, iMessage as are great examples of, privacy preserving tools that are achieving adoption. I've said this over and over again. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but make privacy invisible. Right? Privacy tries to make you invisible in your communication, your money, but you have to make the privacy part of it, the technology, invisible as well. And that's where I've really respected the efforts to do that. And the funny thing is they come at compromise, right? And I think that's the part that a lot of users, advocates, enthusiasts need to accept, is that if you want to get it adopted, you're going to have a bit of a compromise. And there's a compromise in things like iMessage. That one happens to be closed source. Well, you can get better by going into Signal. Signal has a bit of a compromise in the sense that you still provide a phone number. So now there's metadata. This phone number is chatting with this phone number, but you don't know what they're saying. So the entire cryptography ecosystem of especially kind of early cryptographers, the cypherpunks, were really plagued with the perfect and being enemy of the good, and they didn't adopt certain systems because they weren't perfect. And Signal is a classic example of the imperfect. So who's chatting with who, but you don't know what they're saying. That's a whole lot better than just saying we give up. Let's just use SMS or let's just use email.
Of course.
And similar trade-offs exist in cryptocurrency protocols. I know that while obviously we both attended ZCon, I love that very, very high level of privacy that Zcash gives you. The big trade-off is in the user experience, and everyone complains like sync time, how long it takes, what wallets are supported. And early on, it was like how long the transaction took to create. Could take 3 minutes on a desktop computer. Obviously, it's much faster now. It's much more usable. But the compromise that a protocol like Monero offers as an alternative, you could do the kind of slow sync time, but there is the view key compromise, right? Where it's like, I'm going to give up information as to my incoming transaction or incoming inputs, but not give up the outgoing with the exchange of these are fast, simple, synchronous. Syncing your wallet is instant, and I can send and receive transactions very seamlessly. That compromise is not great, but for the UX trade-off and making it usable, so many people can use Monero that are just normal people. Like it's almost like using a Signal, right?
Yeah.
As long as you get over the hurdle of using any crypto, right? Using any crypto is difficult.
Yeah,
right? It's difficult in and of itself. But once you get over that hurdle, it's analogous to sending some Bitcoin. It's in some ways even easier than sending Bitcoin
because of fees and stuff.
Fees are lower. It confirms faster, but also one of the little known UX improvements that you can get from Monero, if you have a little nugget of privacy that you'd like to preserve, is that you can map wallet names to it and not compromise your privacy. So, as an example, like .eth domains, or I'm a big fan of FIO. People can send me funds at Paul@edge, but if that comes into a privacy coin, that doesn't allow everybody to see how much money I have associated to my name, whereas that would be true with Ethereum. And so I don't map an Ethereum address to my FIO account. Actually, I do now, but that's a very temporary one where as soon as money goes in, it gets like swapped and whatnot into another asset. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, I don't recommend that people do that because of that privacy compromise. So you kind of get both halves of, with privacy protocols, you get kind of hopefully the user experience side improves along with the privacy. And that kind of, I think, is the goal.
Yeah. And before kind of moving on with this thing, I should say that the Edge account retweeted the thing. I want to know, is that Madison or is that someone else doing that? If so,
Possibly,
if so,
likely,
hi,
likely
Madison.
Madison, maybe Peter. Madison's actually going to be out for quite some time on a little
Yeah.
vacay, but
Okay.
it could be her or Peter on our team.
Well, hi Peter. Then, good to see you retweeting and pumping my weak little numbers here. I should highlight Naomi Rockwell's quote tweet on this because where she's coming from, obviously, is I think we're all completely in agreement about privacy and the human rights aspect of it and everything. She's coming from it from a perspective trying to advance the normalization of privacy and stuff. Whereas with this news discussion show, while that is certainly on my mind, I'm also just trying to like talk about realistically what happened, kind of educate in a more impartial way, even though I'm very partial on this issue. Anyway, she said, should we arrest Bill Gates too? I hear that money launderers also used Windows computers for the criminal activities.
Yeah,
And
she makes a good point.
that
But
is a
Bill
fair
Gates
point.
is analogous to Signal, right? They're not arresting the Signal developers and the foundation, like the nonprofit that runs Signal, because a lot of other people use it as well for very, very valid, like privacy is normal type of use cases. And actually, this should come as a warning to both users and developers. You put yourself at much, much, much higher risk of getting cracked down on and potentially arrested if you develop privacy tools that really won't be usable by the masses. When you develop very niche, difficult to use tools that are only motivated to be used by criminals, then you put a big target on your head. But if you market to the mass market and you make it easy enough, so that's double motivation for us builders, right? We're
Yeah.
motivated both in getting more users into what we build, but also not going to jail because it makes sense. Like you're appealing to everyone. Make something normal because there's a good in all of us getting that.
Yeah, and in a very small side note that I don't want to belabor for too long, I have at some point mentioned that I think that Monero in particular might need a little bit of a makeover in the future because a lot of past overtures have been saying like, look at our darknet market usage, having a big like kind of like supervillain like logo and like like all that kind of like it's for criminals kind of thing. As it approaches, it seems to be doing better than a lot of the other privacy enhancing assets as far as mainstream adoption. At some point, I think the rhetoric has to kind of tone down and kind of present itself more like, no, it's for everyone. It's not just for weirdos.
So the hard part about it is the it. What
Yes.
is, I call this pronoun abuse. And if there's any
Yes.
time that we've been abusing pronouns, it's in the past several years. But what is it when you say like Monero? Monero needs to. Well, there's going to be people in the Monero community that's what they want to say.
Of course.
And that's what they want to say. They're free to say it. So then really comes about a different group or another use case for Monero is what needs to come out. And that's part of the builders and the users of Monero to start accepting it for payment, paying things with it. And I've long considered like, hey, do we expand in Edge the ability for people to get paid in Monero in addition to Bitcoin? And there's a notable advantage to that. It is inconvenient for people to rotate their Bitcoin address. And it's probably not terribly difficult for people to then go and see like, what's everyone else's address that they're receiving Bitcoin into all within the company. So there's a privacy leak there. Whereas that just simply wouldn't be the case for Monero. Probably the main barrier to that is liquidity and tracking of yet another asset in our accounting and whatnot.
Yeah, of course.
But the ability to pay is there, right? And ability for people to receive. So normalizing it, making the use of privacy preserving tools normal and widely adopted, that is the key thing. I can't help but think that if every merchant that took Bitcoin even, which is not a lot of merchants, right? It's not a lot, But if every single one of them just as easily took Monero, that would at least 10x the acceptance of it being like, oh, it's just a currency that people can pay in and people are using it.
Yeah.
How do we get there? Start asking to utilize, get paid in, take out contracts and pay your merchants, especially in those places like New Hampshire where they're all about getting, crypto and paying in crypto and whatnot. It's like, well, expand that to the privacy cryptos as well.
Absolutely. And I should then put up Eric Voorhees' tweet, of course, where he says, in the coming years, each society will decide whether privacy is a right or a crime. Two very different worlds await such societies. And so he's kind of making that point of like privacy as a whole rather than just like in a specific use case, that as a society where it's normalized, which is one reason like I really don't like the crypto term privacy coin, because it's just like a scalability coin. Like if everyone's going to use it, it has to scale, right? If this is going to be usable by anyone, it has to have some kind of privacy. And so like I'd like the privacy to just be, well, duh, rather than you have to say, well, this one is a privacy coin. They all should be privacy coins, in my view.
Yeah, they all should be. I think there is going to be an inherent challenge. I feel like non-private coins will continue to exist. And even in the world where we're 100% crypto, we'll probably still continue to have non-private coins. And now the question comes, where are those used in the grander ecosystem? And can we make it such that it's kind of invisible how they're used? You don't even know that you bet by and large are in the privacy side, and you don't know that something then goes into this transparent and back and it flows in and out. Like one example of that, like Tornado Cash is an example of one where you do very explicit entry and exit into privacy, right? Like you don't actually leave anything. You don't interact in any private world in Tornado Cash. Just money goes in, money goes out. And when it goes in from transparent and it goes out to transparent. Naomi had, I think about a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, introduced me to the Railgun project.
Oh yeah.
Which allows you to interact with kind of the ecosystem of smart contracts and DeFi in a more private manner, in the sense that you may have your transparent money, which then goes into Railgun. But then once it's in Railgun, it interfaces with all this DeFi as a different address than your own. So you're holding transparent, but what you're doing with it is obfuscated from your address.
Yeah,
and that could be made automatic, where you don't even realize that's happening, right? So you're kind of getting this transition without realizing it. And then where can we take that one step further? Because I know that smart contracts, they themselves being fully programmable, it's insanely difficult, if not impossible, to have smart contracts operate on shielded balances, where somehow the contract, which is fully public and auditable code, is saying transfer this amount of money, but I have no idea how much money I'm transferring. That's probably near impossible. But the interfaces to the smart contract, like when you enter and exit, that's where all that is just simply transferring of funds, and you could shield and unshield them. So where I think a future of like an ETH needs to be is such that when we're just kind of holding our funds, we hold that in something shielded like a Zcash type of ecosystem. And then we make this call into something like a Railgun, which then kind of unshields it, puts it into this whole smart contract world, and then shields it back out. And there are examples of this in various projects for something as simple as like a swap, right?
Yeah.
You're sending some funds. It doesn't say what's happening with it. It's actually swapping, and then out comes some other funds. So I think there's a future for us in being able to use kind of invisible privacy tools. You don't even know you're doing it, but we're pretty far from it. But I encourage a lot of developers that are looking at building projects, even like the Railgun team. Right now, it's still pretty opt-in. Hide it where people just get it without even trying.
Well, yeah, and that the Railgun example is fantastic on both sides of this, because on the one hand, from my understanding, if you just use the Railway wallet, you can just have fully shielded everything when you're doing it, right? You could just it's not an extra UX. You just use this wallet and then it's all private kind of thing, which makes sense. It's easy to use. Now, one thing that I should kind of say, unfortunately, which comes into the whole scaling thing, Ethereum is brutally expensive as it is, and making it going through the railgun contract makes it
Very expensive.
so much more expensive. And
Yeah.
so if you're doing something like just very small operations on something like Polygon, it's not that bad. You do start to see a notice of increasing doing it privately, but then when you start doing L1 ETH through Railgun and do some like fancy Uniswap trades or whatever, you're starting to be, you have to be in like whale territory at that point. And that's
Yeah.
a fundamental challenge of really good privacy. Is not just the user experience, it's also the cost, whether it's the cost to the end user or it's just the cost to the network in terms of computational ability, data storage, other stuff like that. It's just another difficult problem to solve. And so that's where the challenge comes in not being opt-in, is when it starts to cost a lot, then everyone who maybe doesn't care has to pay for a service or they don't necessarily want. And it's at that point, I personally think it's worth just everyone still using it, but just find a way to make scaling work well enough to where the cost is still okay, even if they're all using the privacy. But then some people might go the other direction. And
I'd say we need to
tricky
figure it
battle.
out where it's a tricky battle. You do need to make it where even people that don't care are using it. And one of the analogies I give is that privacy is a lot like financial markets, is that it needs liquidity, right? Financial markets need liquidity. If you want to go dollar to the euro, if there's no one that wants to buy your dollar, it's hard to get a euro or the price spikes, that kind of thing. Well, privacy needs liquidity too, but that liquidity comes in the form of, well, in the case of something like Tornado Cash, it comes in actual liquidity. You need actual money sitting there so that you can hide and get obfuscated. But in other ways that are not financial, i.e., like using Signal, it's in the anonymity set. All right. If you and I are the only ones using Signal, there's not a lot of privacy because everyone knows it's just you and I. But hiding in the anonymity set of potentially millions of people increases your privacy. And that's one of the biggest reasons from day one that I wanted to develop something that was really mass adoptable, is because those people that don't care about privacy give the people that do care or that need it. Like you'd mentioned, that third category of people that might have been using Tornado Cash are people that kind of need it. Maybe they're in authoritarian governments and they're communicating what we'd at least deem ideologically sound communications, maybe to escape, to get out. Those people that need privacy need all the other people that don't care to use it. And
Yeah,
they
of
are able
course.
to be a part of that larger anonymity set. So critical for actually getting privacy. And I think that's one of the failures of Tornado Cash. It just wasn't a big enough anonymity set to really make it seem normal.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing is, as a business, and this is where we're going to hit on that thing next. As a business, you have to make money, and you have to make money on people who will pay to use your product. And if the average person doesn't care about privacy, they won't pay you. And so you have to, they especially don't go out of your way to pay you. And so then you have to find people who will pay you. And that kind of seems to be, unfortunately, what tripped them up a little bit. So I'm sending this thing from Matthew Green. He was checking through the documents about the arrest. It says, good old venture capital firm one, where let's see, the Tornado Cash founders eventually obtained financing from California-based venture capital fund one, among other investors, blah blah blah. And so, first off, they raised VC money for this thing, which is a lot like a company. And so which I don't think it is, but at the same time, when you're making a case to law enforcement, when you're telling the cops, no, we're not a company, it's a decentralized protocol, that then if they say, well, then why are you raising VC money? And obviously,
I might take it. So what if you're a company?
yeah.
So what,
Well,
right? The only part of being a company that creates challenges is if you're doing like a token issuance, and is it a security? But that to me has less of a bearing on,
Yep.
whether or not
That's a
you
different
did some.
problem too.
That's a different problem altogether. But so what if you're a company? Signal is an entity. I mean, you call it a company or not, but it's an entity. Apple is an entity. They run iMessage. They run the infrastructure. That in and of itself is not going to cause or alleviate the legal concerns, right? Even if you're not a company, you could still have legal concerns. I mean, heck, what if they just ran the servers on their own free will with no money and they lost money? I would think this case would still come against them.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. I don't think there's any one reason necessarily. There's a few.
Yeah.
But so interesting in this thing, supposedly they discussed the possibility of a service that offered privacy. Let's see what the rest is. Let's see. Privacy for blockchain with full compliance. Basically, a fork of Tornado Cash, but with KYC AML in it. The investors at Venture Capital One dismissed the idea, with one of them writing, "I just don't know if anyone will actually want this. Market need seems quite thin." So this is all
I
stuff.
remember reading that.
I believe
Yeah.
this was
Why
all
would they?
was it Telegram chats or other things, but whatever it is, unencrypted stuff that, or however this was obtained, this doesn't make them look good from that perspective. In that, I guess a lot of the defense is, oh, we can do, like, we deployed a contract that's outside of our control. Anyone can use it to obtain privacy, and we have no actual ability to decide who does and who doesn't and select for bad actors or whatever. And which is all true, by the way. But the problem is once you, in the founding, start talking about, well, we could make it a permissioned thing, and then they're like, yeah, there's no money in it, and then that gives law enforcement then that gives them like excuses to come after you.
It gives them excuses. In reality, and even the law enforcement document admitted this, is that anything that they could have done would be meaningless from the viewpoint it's all circumventable by just simply accessing the contract directly, because everything was based on this front end that they were building. And had deployed and provided, resources for, and sure, they could put the AML and KYC and decided not to, and sure, it was mentioned, but in reality, say they did implement it and determined that all of this illegal traffic from North Korea still went through the contract. It's like, and it probably would have, because that interface is easily duplicatable. Right, the interface to be able to talk to the smart contract is trivially duplicated. I think that's the part of the document that I have a little bit of trouble with, because they took what they did not do and married it to what assumed that it would have helped in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
that's the leap of faith that the document tries to make. It's like, oh, if only they added this AML KYC, then all this money laundering coming out of North Korea wouldn't have happened. And that's the leap of faith that I definitely don't fundamentally believe, because if there's that much money that wants to launder, it's going to do it. Even if it does it through fucking HSBC and nobody goes to jail, it's still going to happen. So I still keep going back to the, it's who by and large is using it, and how many normal people are using it that rely on it, who would flip out if you took it away from them. It's like, hey, don't take this away from us. This is what we rely on for just kind of normal processes. And much like, hey, you can't rip out SSL from the internet. You're going to piss off a lot of people. And fundamentally, I do think that eventually we will normalize privacy, and governments will demand it, both because they'll have to, because it's being used by the citizenship, and then also because the governments know nothing more than people, and people within the government themselves will want privacy. Possibly even because some of them don't want to, are doing some illicit activity.
Well, definitely.
Right. I mean, I'm sure Hunter Biden could have benefited from some better financial privacy in some of the stuff that he did. So a lot of people will be motivated for privacy for good and bad reasons. It's just a tool, as we know. It'll be used for all sorts of myriad of reasons.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings to the point that I made yesterday, I believe, about said in some tweet of mine, said, however, lots of privacy project devs have not been arrested. I think what made Tornado Cash a target was the alleged Lazarus Group laundering. U.S. foreign policy relies heavily on sanctions, and they'll do anything to make it seem like you can't successfully evade them, even though you can. So honestly, like, railguns out there, I really like those guys. I hope they don't get in trouble for anything. There's Samurai Wallet, there's, Wasabi, there's obviously a bunch of Monero devs, a bunch of Zcash devs who are all very public in, or mostly, I guess, and in
Mhm.
US based with like foundations, companies, and stuff. There's so much out there. No one cares about any of these people in terms of like a sending the jail thing yet. Again, fingers crossed. But when you have North Korean hackers, not just hackers, but North Korean hackers, a specifically sanctioned country, and that's when like the U.S. government, the federal government, relies very heavily on its power to be able to be whatever they say goes in the world, and they have to maintain the appearance of strength in this for their interests. And I think that this is
Yeah.
repugnant to me personally, but this is the way they operate. And there have been a string of arrests of crypto educators who are facing serious charges because they simply just traveled to North Korea to educate people on how to use crypto. And
Right.
they're not playing around with this. And so I think if there's evidence that North Korean hackers had used Signal, I think Signal might be too big to fail at this point. It might be, you might be able to say, I don't want to say too big to fail, but I'm saying it might be big enough to where you can make the good faith case that it's almost entirely regular people and like journalists and stuff using it. Whereas with Tornado Cash, almost like very few people use
Certainly.
crypto.
I've
And-
never used Tornado Cash back when it was legal. Like,
Yeah.
I barely knew about it, and then when I did hear about it, I'm like, it looks like a bit of a pain in the butt to use. I'm not going to bother. And so I'm one of the
Yeah.
worst privacy advocates because I don't use so many of the privacy tools. Like, I do highly recommend everyone listen to like Naomi and listen to her videos and whatnot. And probably 90% of that, of her advice and recommendations, I don't follow because they're in that category of kind of unnormal privacy
of
that I
nerd
wouldn't recommend
stuff.
to someone else. It's nerd level privacy that I wouldn't recommend to my mom, my sister, brother-in-law, and whatnot. Once it achieves that level, not only do I start using it, I start promoting it very heavily, but so few of those tools have achieved that level of usability. And Signal really is one of the few ones, like
Very few.
Signal iMessage. If there were a Gmail alternative or a Google Suite alternative, I'd love to recommend that, and I'd even recommend like Proton Mail, but even that is kind of like, it's like,
it's not there yet.
it's like early 2000s web email, and not quite 90s. It's better than 90s, but it's, we've gotten accustomed to a lot more functionality in our email clients, and that isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
I do recommend Brave. So
course.
Brave is another one
Super
that's kind of
easy.
crossed. Yeah. And there was I was just recently on a Twitter space. It's literally about crypto privacy. An hour before this, I think it was about an hour before the indictment occurred for the Tornado Cash developers. And someone had mentioned how like, yeah, these privacy tools, I think it was a Crypto Man Ran said, oh, these privacy tools are so hard, like, blah, blah, blah. Then he mentioned like Brave, and then suddenly his websites don't work. I'm like, really?
Yeah. He must have used Brave when they launched, not today.
Yeah, today I'd say 99% of the sites I go to work just fine. Ironically, one of the few sites that doesn't work is like a crypto site, all right? And that's it, like trying to interface with like MetaMask and whatnot. But
Yeah.
just standard websites that my family and friends would use, they absolutely work. So I do promote Brave because it's crossed that chasm, all right?
Yeah.
So Brave, Signal, those across the chasm. But most of the other things still haven't. There's
Yeah.
not friendly enough.
Brave, Signal, and even some VPNs are just easy enough to just flip on and you're there. I would say like Ubuntu's close, but still you do have to touch a command line at some point. So no.
Any Unix is no.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love Unix. I love Linux. It has its place, but not in the hands of any of my friends or family, like by a long margin. But
Yeah.
Brave. Actually, I'd say probably I don't even recommend I don't recommend to family to regularly use a VPN because it is kind of hard. However, the built-in one inside of Brave for at least your web browsing does make it almost invisible. Like it's just, you just don't even think about it. Unfortunately, the part of VPNs that sucks though is a lot of websites don't work if you use VPNs because they recognize it and then they block it. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of turns turning a VPN on turns your Brave browser into kind of like back when it first launched.
Yeah, so there's like a certain percentage of, I'm sure what happened was that, and the other one is just from like the super, like, I guess normie perspective. You trying to say like, oh, like, for example, everyone, I don't know about everyone, but like probably a lot of people try to, for lack of a better term, like bullshit the cops. You get pulled over, you're in trouble or whatever. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Like everyone says whatever, and to a certain extent, I'm sure no, decentralized protocol, we can't even stop it. Like all that kind of line. What they see is these guys raised money, started a thing, and they make money off of letting people launder money. And here you go, North Korea does this. And you guys even discussed in private messages about like ways that you decided you wouldn't have the ability. You decided against the ability to stop this. Bang, your launders go to jail. Like it makes sense, the connection of like simplicity in there. And I understand there's tons of nuance, but when you have this, the developers who are publicly known, have bank accounts, VC money, and they create this smart contract, they deploy this protocol, but they also, from my understanding, ran the major front end, like the thing that people use this through. When you have all that together, plus North Korea, it's just like, it makes perfect sense, unfortunately. As sad as it is to say, as innocent as these people are, it's
right.
Unfortunately makes sense.
You can take these nuggets that imply guilt and combine together, make for what looks like a guilty party.
Yeah.
None all by themselves. No one thing by itself implies any guilt. And even together, if you look at the nuance, also doesn't imply guilt. But yeah, if you cherry pick these pieces, which in and of itself doesn't even prevent the like if they had solved a lot of these little nugget pieces, that doesn't prevent North Korea from accessing the service. It's still it's still a leap that the government had made. So I mean, maybe that's just kind of a guideline for developers. If you are developing what would be considered like not for the normal people, not for mass adoption type of tools that are very nuanced, very niche, difficult to use, then you've got to take this like, hey, we write the code and that's it. Boom. Someone else deploy the smart contract with no keys. And it's like, here's an anonymous GitHub account with an HTML file that you download onto your computer kind of thing. And you just steer as clear away from it as you possibly can. And it's that's because we don't want like good developers in the ecosystem going to jail. And I don't know if I didn't even mention this, but I actually was on a brief call with Roman Storm back in 2015. Myself, he was a developer out of SF, and at the time we were hiring, so he's one of the people we talked to. It didn't work out for a number of reasons, so it was only a brief call that we had. But he seemed like a sharp guy, and I remember seeing the indictment and going, "Oh my God, I kind of know that guy. I know that guy." He'd gone to the meetups. He met our COO at the time, and our COO was like, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy. Seems really sharp, and he's looking for a gig and whatnot." I'm like, "Oh, okay," but yeah, it's easy to get tripped up, and I think. Yeah, all of us in this space, we realize that we're building something disruptive. It's going to upset some people. It doesn't cleanly fit into the existing legal system, both in that AML, KYC, and then also the financial SEC. Is it a
which I should
security or not?
Which I should kind of rephrase as the existing legal system doesn't accurately deal with this.
It doesn't accurately.
The other way around is, I think the onus is on laws to make sense of the world, not the world to necessarily conform to laws, kind of.
No. And laws always come after. Laws are made in the current or even like the past state of the world. So it's impossible to make a law that will encompass the future of the world. All right. And so that's one of the problems with laws in general, is especially if you have a lot of them, and nothing has a larger law book than the US.
Unfortunately,
I think our it's not our national pastime, but it's probably the biggest sport in our country of football. Probably has a rule book bigger than some countries, and that's very in line with the culture here. It's a very illegal culture, but that is the inherent problem with laws in general. And if you have too many of them, it becomes a bigger problem, which is you can't account for the future, because the future will make some of those irrelevant. So you're right. We don't try to take new things and new technologies and conform them. They get built, and then the legal system has to conform around that. And we're just going to hope that it conforms around that in a much more forward and progressive way that allows for their adoption and actual utilization and core benefit, and not in some draconian way that stamps it down and therefore moves it to some other country, especially the ones that this country hates, which I feel like it will get adopted, like what they consider to be the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, the thing with this particular case, there's a lot of sad things about it. Obviously, the saddest thing is people are being harmed who did nothing but try to create innovative tech and run an honest business off of it. That's, of course, very tragic. Part of it, as we talk about the precedent of arresting open source developers, I don't believe that the open source part is what, as I already mentioned, is what got people to pay it, what got law enforcement to pay attention to this. But I do believe that was the unintentional secondary casualty of this. Is they just it's almost like they don't see the open source part. They arrest those people, but in so doing set a dangerous precedent. So now when there is a fully decentralized protocol that has no front end that's run anywhere near by any of the developers, no VC funding, all this kind of stuff, that they're just some nerd typing in code who doesn't even deploy the contract, who just writes code, that now there might be precedent to actually arrest that guy. And that's where it gets really scary. The kind of thing that Naomi was talking about in her tweet, I don't think this thing represents it, but it does open the door for that now to potentially happen in the future. It's kind of like the next step down this bad road.
Right. No, it does. It is a dangerous precedent because now you potentially have people fearsome to write code that could be very transformative for the world. And that's the kind of fear we definitely don't want to have, because some people are just simply well-meaning. You don't want them to have to feel like they are defying their government and putting their life and livelihood at risk just by writing code. So there are a few people that absolutely want to put their life and livelihood at risk and defy the government by writing code. There are a few of those people. Some of them we know personally. I've had multiple chats with like an Amir Taki, and it's almost like he's begging, like, go ahead, come and get me, all right? But I'm going to go down swinging and empower the world with these new, basically digital bombs. But you're not going to be able to build out an ecosystem with just those people. You might get the foundations. Those are like they are our cypherpunks to create the foundation, but to bring it to the masses, you need just well-meaning developers that want to build companies or just do well and build projects, open source tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so to reinforce just basically what you said, like, we can't have that precedent. And hopefully this goes to something a little bit further than just boom, they're in jail. And I know that sanctions are very unfair in the sense that it's like there's no trial by jury. But if there's any hope that the legal protection that I know they had hired, I think, Brian Klein to take their case, that means that there is a case, which means this can go to court, which means that this can be fought, and there is hope that they win. And saying that, we are not in control of people passing funds through a smart contract that was deployed with no control, of which they have no controls. Hopefully that stands. That's a fingers crossed that we can have for now, so that we set a good precedent for the developers in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah. I do have only a couple minutes, bit of a hard stop coming up. 1 o'clock's rolling around the corner. How should we kind of close this this discussion, hopefully on a happy note?
Let me I guess tie it all back with Satoshi. There's a reason why not you, Craig, right? No one knows who Satoshi really was. There's a reason why it was what you call a fair launch, as in anyone could mine. There's no VC stuff. There's a reason for like the anonymity, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, that's a hard way of launching a project, because a lot of people have tried that since then. It's really hard. It's a lot easier to launch as a company than the old VC model kind of thing. Even like Zcash, right? With Zcash's launch is way easier than that stuff. But at some point, we have to realize that all this rhetoric of like nation states can't stop it, but then you're acting like nation states won't go after you at the same time. At some point, I think we need to build foundations, not like under the just like privacy is normal, right? you need privacy in case the laws change and you are not a criminal today, but you will be in the future, in which case you need privacy, for example. I do think we need to build all our crypto stuff under the, as much as we can at least, under the idea of this could become, we could be persecuted for this. Let's build it to be resistant to this kind of thing. And obviously, some people need day jobs, some people need to live in the light, etc. And that's obviously good. But at this form, when this is still new, especially, I think we need to make sure that the foundations of all this are as decentralized as possible so that we don't have as many of these kinds of early victims of this.
Yeah. Big red flag targets, as we don't want to have those. Let's keep our developers working on what we care about. So
absolutely.
Continue on that path. Cool.
All right. So shill-o'clock. Tell people where to go.
If you want to be able to use a handful of different privacy coins, such as Zcash, Monero, Pirate Chain, check out Edge, edge.app. If you want to continue on and kind of say hi, hello, shoot me a little message at Pollinator, PAULLINATOR on Twitter. It's still Twitter to me.
Yeah,
so
still.
See you guys there. Cool.
All right.
Bye-bye,
guys.
Take care.